Yesterday, a summit on the financing of African economies took place in Paris at the initiative of Emmanuel Macron, who pretends to offer a new deal to the continent. Once again, Macron confirms his reputation of being a notorious plagiarist. After stealing the name ECO from the ECOWAS, he is now stealing the concept of Roosevelt. That being said, Macron's France does not have the capacity to propose a new deal to Africa that will promote the interest of the African people, respect for their fundamental rights, human rights, property rights, freedom and sovereignty. What he has done is serving an expired product in a new packaging. He calls New Deal what they called heavily indebted poor countries initiative not long ago, which were called structural adjustment programs before, which was preceded by the development assistance programs. We've heard it, we've seen it all before. We are 1 year away from the French presidential election. Macron wants to use the African continent to solve its internal problems. He was elected by the French to deal with their issues, but he has completely failed and has proven himself unable to tackle France's unemployment, migration, debt and deindustrialization. And he wants to propose a new deal to African countries, give them advice and help them cope with their economic problems when France is the most indebted country in Europe in terms of debt to GDP? Really? That must be a joke. Macron has absolutely no legitimacy whatsoever in discussing our debt, our future, our economic, political or diplomatic choices. It is unacceptable for France to take the lead in thinking, acting, supporting action and providing expertise to African countries. Africa has 54 countries. Only 18 of them are attending this useless event. That's good news. It shows that France has its influence, has lost its influence, has lost ground here. Do the 18 African heads of states present in Paris have the approval of their population to enter this discussion? What polls have been conducted on the continent to identify the real concern of the people? I heard an interesting statement from the Elysée announcing that France is proposing to give Africa access to special drawing rights, SDRs, from the IMF. Those instruments that can, in particular, finance imports. Simply said, African debt is the money the developed countries lend to Africa for Africans to buy the products of developed countries. We do not get that money to transform our continent, to industrialize it. Our useless head of states are taking new debt in order to repay the ancient debt. In June, the IMF is expected to issue $650 billion in SDRs, including $34 billion for Africa. They take the name of Africa and use it to justify the issuance of these massive SDRs. But when you look at it closely, you see that Africa is only getting 5% of it. Where are the remaining 95% going? If Africa is getting $34 billion, who is getting the remaining $616 billion? Where is the summit for those beneficiaries? As I said earlier, Macron wants to use the African continent to solve its internal problem. And the professional beggars we call heads of state are celebrating the $34 billion debt package as a victory, knowing very well that every year $88 billion leave the continent as illicit capital flows, and they actively contribute to maintain this state of things. But Macron and his African accomplices can't fool us. France is involved in too many fields in Africa without success. Macron just jeopardized the eco-currency project of the ECOWAS. He is afraid of the belly of African women, of migration. He is afraid of Chinese penetration in Africa. The Swiss, the Norwegian, the German, the British, the Swedish do not seem to be whining about what China is doing in Africa, but France is lamenting the threat of losing monopolies they thought would be granted forever based on colonization. How many countries in Africa has France been able to democratize since Mitterrand's speech in La Baule in 1990? 30 years later, Mitterrand is dead, Chirac is dead, Sarkozy is gone, Hollande is off on a scooter, Macron is finishing his term. And what is the state of democracy in Africa? Where are they with the fight against terrorism? With all their military bases on the continent, with all the military operations they impose on us, has terrorism receded in Africa? Of course not. It is even the opposite that we see. Wherever French soldiers pass, peace dies and jihadists keep moving forward, which is normal since it is Paris that finances and trains them. The only deal Emmanuel Macron can offer us is to get out of our currency and stop to interfere in African politics and the daily life of Africans. He and his country must leave us alone once and for all. That's the only proposal that will resonate well with the people of Africa. Thank you.